So the other day, I was sitting with this really successful guy, let's call him James. He's been following my content for a while, and he mentioned how he lost $500,000 on his first real estate deal. Now, this is someone who's incredibly smart. We're talking top of his class, multiple degrees, and successful businesses, the entire package. And it got me thinking, because I see this pattern all the time. They're really smart, successful people, and somehow struggle with real estate investing. What's crazy is when you look at the data, up to 95% of people who want to get into real estate investing never even buy their first property. And here's what's even more interesting. A huge chunk of these are highly educated, successful professionals. And I've been thinking about this a lot, looking at actual case studies, and I realized there are some really fascinating psychological patterns going on here. Now, just in case you're new here and don't know my background, I used to work in corporate sales, and today I own a portfolio worth over $15 million, including 7 Airbnbs that generate over $400,000 in net cash flow. And I'm not sharing this to brag, I'm sharing this because after spending over $70,000 on real estate education and trying pretty much every single model out there, from house hacking to assisted living facilities, I learned exactly why smart people often fail at real estate, even though they absolutely shouldn't be. And I've had the chance to work with and study hundreds of investors, both successful and unsuccessful ones. I've seen the patterns, I've analyzed the data, and I've actually compiled research from places like MIT and major market studies that show exactly why this happens. And what I like to do in this video is break down the 5 main psychological traps that smart people fall into when it comes to real estate, and most importantly, show you exactly how to avoid them. I also want to show you the exact framework that helped me succeed, because here's the thing. Being smart should be an advantage in real estate, but only if you know how to use it properly. All right, so let's start with trap number 1, which I call analysis paralysis. This one's fascinating because it actually comes from an MIT study on decision-making patterns. What they found is that highly educated people often suffer from what they call decision paralysis. Basically, the more options and data that they have, the harder it becomes to make a decision. Let me give you a real example of this. Remember James that I talked about in the beginning of this video? When he was looking at his first deal, he spent 6 months analyzing different properties. He built these incredibly complex spreadsheets, ran multiple scenarios, and kept looking for more data. You want to know what happened? While he was analyzing, 3 perfect properties that fit his criteria got bought by other investors who were willing to act faster. And the really interesting thing about this is that when they interviewed successful real estate investors, they found out that most of them made their purchase decisions within 2 to 4 weeks of starting their search. And it's not because they were careless, but it's because they understood something crucial. In real estate, speed of execution often matters more than perfect analysis. The second trap, and this one's really counterintuitive, and it's what I call the overconfidence effect. There's this fascinating case study from Jacksonville, Florida, where a group of highly qualified developers, we're talking MBA graduates from top schools, built these luxury apartments. They had all these complex models showing why it would work, but they missed something really basic. They overbuilt the market, leading to a 50% higher vacancy rate than they projected. I actually saw this firsthand when I was starting out. I remember looking at this property that seemed perfect on paper. All the numbers worked, the projections looked amazing, but when I actually visited the neighborhood, I realized that that entire area was being overdeveloped. If I had just trusted my spreadsheets, then I would have made a huge mistake. The third trap, and this one's gonna hit home for a lot of people, is what I like to call the complex strategy trap. Smart people love complex solutions. It's just really how our brains work. They think if it's not complicated, then it can be valuable. But here's what's fascinating. When you look at the most successful real estate investors, especially those doing over $10 million in revenue, their core strategies are usually surprisingly simple. I remember talking to this really successful investor. He's built over a $20 million portfolio. And you know what his strategy was? He buys properties with good cash flow in growing neighborhoods, making sure that the numbers work with conservative estimates, and then holds them long term. That's literally it. No complex tax strategies, no elaborate financing schemes, just solid fundamentals executed well. The fourth trap is what I call the knowledge versus experience gap. This one's really interesting because it goes against everything we've been taught in traditional education. You see, in school, we learn that if you study hard and understand the theory, you're gonna do well. But in real estate, book knowledge only gets you about 20% of the way there. The other 80% comes from actual experience. Let me show you what I mean. Look at these 2 investors. One's a PhD in economics who's read every real estate book out there. The other is a high school graduate who started by managing properties for other people. And guess who's doing better? The high school graduate. And the reason is because they learned the business from the ground up. They understand how things actually work in the real world, not just in theory. And I remember when I first started, I thought I knew everything because I read all these books about real estate investing. And then I had my first tenant emergency at 2 in the morning. And let me tell you, none of those books prepare me for a basement flooding. That's the kind of experience you can't get from reading. Fifth and final trap is what I call the risk calculation paralysis. Smart people are usually really good at calculating risks, but sometimes they're just so good at it that they see risks everywhere. There's this really interesting study that showed that people with higher IQs are actually more prone to overestimating risks in investment scenarios. And what ends up happening is that they spend so much time trying to eliminate all possible risks that they miss out on actual good opportunities. It's like they're looking for this mythical perfect property that has 0 risk, which, spoiler alert, doesn't exist. During the 2020 market uncertainty, I saw this play out in real time. A lot of highly educated investors completely froze up trying to calculate every possible scenario. Meanwhile, other investors who understood that some risk is inevitable were able to make some really smart purchases during that period. Okay, so now that we understand these traps, let me share with you the framework that I use to avoid them. I call this the Smart Investors Action Framework, and it has 5 key components. The first one is what I like to call the 2-week rule. This is something I learned from studying successful real estate investors. Once you find a property that meets your basic criteria, you give yourself 2 weeks to make a decision. Not 6 months, not 3 months, 2 weeks. This forces you to focus on what really matters that prevents analysis paralysis. The second one is the 70% rule. This is really powerful. You only need to be 70% confident in a deal to move forward. And you're probably asking yourself, okay, why 70%? Because it's enough to ensure that you're not being reckless, but not so high that you're never going to take action. The remaining 30% you're going to figure out through experience. Number 3 is what I call the mentor fast track. Instead of trying to learn everything from books, find someone who's actively doing what you want to do. I mean actual real estate investors in your local market. The knowledge you're going to get from one coffee meeting with an experienced investor is worth more than 50 books. Number 4 is the implementation plan. This is where you're going to bridge the gap between knowledge and experience. You want to start small, maybe by managing someone else's property or partnering with an experienced investor. Get your hands dirty before you risk your own capital. And finally, number 5 is the feedback loop. For every deal that you look at, whether you do it or not, document your analysis and decisions. And then you're going to review them every 3 months, and this is going to help you refine your judgment over time. Now let me show you how this works in practice. Remember James, the guy that I mentioned at the start? After his $500,000 loss, he actually used this framework for his next deal, and here's what he did differently. Instead of spending 6 months analyzing, he gave himself 2 weeks to decide on each property. He focused on simple cash flow properties instead of complex development deals. And most importantly, he partnered with an experienced investor on his first few deals. And the result, his next 3 properties have been successful investments, generating steady cash flow with far less stress than his first attempt. And interestingly, he says that he actually feels more confident now, even though he's doing less analysis because he's operating with a proven framework. But here's the thing, being smart is absolutely an advantage in real estate, but only if you use it the right way. The goal isn't to be the smartest person in the room, it's to be the person who takes smart action. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in any of these traps, then don't worry. Just start with one piece of the framework. Maybe it's implementing the 2-week rule on your next deal, or maybe it's reaching out to potential mentors in your local market. And if you found this helpful, I've actually created a free detailed training of this entire framework and the best real estate method to start with in 2024 and 2025. I'm going to show you exactly how I went from 0 to managing 7 Airbnbs that generate over $400,000 in annual cash flow, including how to finding profitable properties in today's market, even if you're not a real estate expert. I'm going to show you how I close win-win deals with property owners. I'm going to give you my exact scripts, how to set up systems so your business runs on autopilot just like I do, working only a few hours per week. I'm also going to share with you real case studies of my students, including one who's making over $20,000 per month with just his first 3 properties. If you're serious about succeeding in real estate and you want to avoid the expensive mistakes that trap even the smartest investors, then tap the link in the description and you can watch it right away. And one last thing, I'm really curious to hear your experience with this. Have you fallen into any of these traps? Are you currently stuck in analysis paralysis? Let me know in the comments below and I'll do my best to help you out. If you found this video helpful, please like the video and I'll see you in the next one.